Thanks, Colin. It's great to see you, everyone. And yes, I hope you had a little time to stretch and get some water and take good care of yourself between sessions. If not, I always invite you to do whatever it is you need to do to stay well as we're moving through this. So the intention of this session is to really be a work session for all of us, and I'll explain this a little more detail as I move through. But yeah, I'm sure you've spent a lot of time the last few days sitting and listening attentively, and I'm really hoping that we can spend some of this time in some small groups and have some really meaningful conversation. So for those of you who were here this morning, I'm just going to really briefly walk through where we're at. So where are we? I think it's probably fair to say that we've all been responding to a critical event over the last however many months. We're starting to actually demarcate our time in the pre-COVID times and the post-COVID times, or the mid-COVID times. But I think it's pretty fair to say that we're all really dealing with a really critical event in our time, whether it be in our families, in our communities, in our schools, with our kids, with our students, with our parents. Having elderly parents, this is definitely something that is a concern for me. And I think that it allows us and it prompts us to ask a lot of questions. And I liked this slide in particular because there were some really, I thought, poignant questions to consider. You know, how is this impacting us? Where are my people? You know, where do I belong? How do I navigate this with my people where I belong? Who should we notify? Who do we need to be talking to? How do we stay in sync? How do we make sure that we're aligned in our work and aligned in our response? And particularly in a day and age where it feels as though there's a lot of polarization and a lot of divisiveness. And you know, in and of itself, disagreement is not a bad thing, but it is important that we agree to disagree and do our best to stay aligned. How can we respond faster? I think I'll take a pass on that one. I think we're all doing our best to just respond in a timely way, given that we're consistently dealing with a shifting platform. And you know, how should we respond? And this ties back to what I had mentioned, and the tie into social emotional learning, is that how we respond really does make a huge difference. And in terms of thinking about what is social emotional learning at its heart, it really is a way of being. And we are, whether we're on screen or in person with our students, our colleagues, our friends, our family, we're modeling what it means to be operating from a mindful and aware place. And what does that look like? And what happens when we don't? So this is just a kind of a food for thought slide. And then thinking about it more in context around where we are now and what we're experiencing now. Where are our students, our staff, and our communities? As I said earlier in the opening, I think it's incredibly important that we don't organize our thoughts around trauma and around deficits and around fixing what's broken. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that individually and collectively we're experiencing a tremendous amount of stress at this particular point in time. But just because we're all experiencing a tremendous amount of stress does not mean that everyone will be traumatized. And I think that it's really important to be elevating strengths, which is why I think that the model that I'll present is really useful and impactful. Because if we elevate strengths, if we really enhance and promote what people bring to the table already, that allows people to rise to the occasion rather than starting to accept a narrative that something is broken that needs to be fixed, and that agent that will fix it is external to them. So that's very disempowering. And obviously, as we know from the research on stress, which is my background, one of the things that contributes to our stress the most is feeling helpless and not feeling as though we had agency to change our reality. And even though we cannot change the reality of this pandemic and its trajectory, we definitely have the ability to negotiate and navigate how we respond to it, and whether or not we want to walk in the world and model awareness, compassion, kindness, etc. So that really is within our reach. And I think that our students, staff, and communities also are coming from a place of strength, even though they or we may not be experiencing that directly right now. If we look and we elevate strength, I think that we will find it. And as I alluded to this morning, when I was working in Flint, Michigan for a few years with the Flint School District in response to the water crisis, which was a horrific tragedy for that community, what I was continuously inspired by was the strength and the resilience of the community, and how they refused to accept the narrative that they needed to be fixed. They refused to be put in a place where they needed to be put in a one down position. And I think that to me really drove home why we do this work and what is important about this entire idea of social emotional learning, that it has to be grounded in a way of being, and it has to be grounded in strength. So that inspired a lot of the model that I'm going to share with you that you saw briefly this morning. So it's always good and important and useful to reflect on where we've been. And as I mentioned earlier, people in the state have done beautiful work in the trauma-informed care space and the trauma-informed system space. There's a lot of wonderful work being done by partners at Trauma-Informed Oregon and others to educate us and equip us to think about how to identify and recognize when someone is experiencing or has experienced trauma and the effects that that experience may be having on their current functioning. We also have a lot of people, I'm sure people in this session, that have done a lot of beautiful work around social emotional learning. As I said, we have school districts, we have ESDs that are really leading in this space and taking the work of Castle and others and putting it into practice in very meaningful ways, and creating school cultures that support flourishing and in very profound and wonderful ways. We also have systems in terms of thinking about health and mental health and well-being, and also academic performance that incorporate a multi-tiered system of supports, and everything from universal school-wide culture, how shall I put this? Culture shifts, really shifts towards health and well-being and compassion and kindness, to targeted interventions for students that need a little bit more support, and also more intensive interventions and crisis interventions. So that's something that's fairly common in most districts. And also I think that there's been and will continue to be more attention paid on what it really means to create equitable systems where students and staff and teachers and families are met exactly where they are and afforded opportunities and access to create equitable systems. And that's a really big part of the value that the Oregon Department of Education is bringing to the educational climate within the state. So again, all of these are wonderful contributors to our educational system. The only concern that I have coming into this work is that, and this is not universal by any stretch, so if this does not apply to you, my apologies, but I think historically in education and elsewhere, these four major components of mental health and well-being have typically been treated separately. So you'll see PDs for trauma-informed. I've worked with districts that spent several years really trying to bring a trauma-informed lens into their work meaningfully. I've worked with districts that are very much embedded in creating positive school climates by using SEL. And there are districts that are really, drilling down and rolling up their sleeves and looking at what does it mean to put an anti-discrimination, anti-racism lens on, and what does that look like in practice, and how can we create equity, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's to mental health services, whether it's to just general health services, or access to family access to supports. All of those things are really important, and all of that work is occurring in the state in beautiful ways. The concern is that in many respects, aspects, that work is being done in a segmented way. And so we felt that it was important to begin to think about how to weave all of these threads together so that we could very intentionally address human health and human mental health in a very cohesive and coordinated way. So where we are now, as I shared with you a little bit this morning, is that we've developed at ODE in partnership with our collaborators at the Oregon Health Authority, who, as you can imagine, are really important partners in the health and mental health picture, particularly now in light of COVID. We have developed this model of mental health. And at ODE, we really see mental health as emphasizing strengths and resilience and enhancing abilities and enhancing and promoting what's already there. When I initially started presenting this model, I identified pretty early on that sometimes mental health is actually equated to as mental illness, the deficit pathology model, and that's not what we're talking about. We're really talking about health and well-being as being central to education. And as you know, without mental health, without health and well-being, without adequate sleep, nutrition, support, safety, relationship, compassion, all of those things are essential in order for each of us to flourish, but particularly our students. It's very difficult to learn and thrive when you are dealing with having your basic physical and psychological needs not being met. We see this as being part of a continuum of care. All of these things, all of these needs I just mentioned are important. Mental health is really at the cornerstone or the center of this, but it is by no means exclusive to the rest of the needs that students have. And as I mentioned earlier, we're working very heavily in partnership with the Oregon Health Authority, and they do, they own the lion's share of responsibility for school-based health centers, a lot of school-based mental health services, and so they are key partners and key players in this story. You might be wondering why the model looks like this. I don't know. I'm guessing some of you might be old enough to remember the Simon game. As a trained musician, Simon was probably one of my greatest fascinations as a child. And if you think about it, if you are playing a game and the game basically, you know, puts up a sound and then you're supposed to press the button and then puts up another sound, and eventually there's a whole sequence of sounds and you're supposed to try to remember it. So it's a great memory game. But if you can imagine, if all of this, if this model only has one sound playing over and over and over again, the music will not be very rich or diverse or satisfying. And so we really want to think about these things from our perspective as a confluence of key ingredients that will help to contribute and support to the mental health and well-being of our students and our families and our staff. So this is the expanded version of this model. So it gives you a little bit more of a sense of the pieces at play. And I want to draw your attention to a few things. One, specifically that, again, this model occurs along a continuum of care with the goal, the end goal of promoting flourishing and self-actualization, as Maslow would call it. So there are a lot of different pieces to this equation that are equally important. We do see that mental health is really at the center of education, and it's at the center of what allows children really to thrive. And as you see in this model, and these pieces and parts could have even been more overlapping in this visual representation, but all of these things, there's a confluence. They really work together. They're integrated. And this is a really big part of what we're wanting to begin to sort out with you, is what does it look like when we center health and well-being around trauma-informed principles and practices. You can see there are some examples around the green bubble. What does it mean to be SEL driven, and what does that look like? What does it mean to truly be strengths-based? So I know that sometimes the MTSS, the tiers are actually used in a way to create labels and categories and classifications that are deficit-based. So when we refer to a student as being a tier 2 student, we're actually creating a label that is a deficit-based label. And yes, we need to identify perhaps a need for additional supports, but in using the terminology that way, we're actually creating a label that a student or family might carry forward. So really thinking about using these terms in a very strengths-based orientation versus as a label or classification structure. And lastly, I think, and very importantly, what does it really mean to be equity-centered? And I think that as a society, we have a lot of work to do, particularly in this one. And what does it mean to be equity-centered as part of how we model mental health, how we model social emotional learning, how we model what it is to be trauma-informed? How do we really do that very important work with ourselves and our systems to see where those inequities are being supported, even though we may not intend for them to be there. There's a tremendous amount of systemic built-in support for principles and practices that are inequitable. So that's really, I would say, the direction right now that the department is going, is thinking very deeply and profoundly about how to center all of what we do in education around health and well-being. And just to be clear, I'm not just referring to student health and well-being. I'm referring to the health and well-being of you, the leaders, your staff, and everyone who touches the space, including families, including community members who we also touch. So a little bit on where we're heading. We have recently submitted a proposal to CASEL and CCSSO, which is the kind of the national parent organization of COSA. And that proposal is to spend the next at least 2 years really thinking deeply about how can we change the system to really support the health and well-being of everyone in our school communities. And so the integrated model of mental health that I shared with you is something that we've developed in collaboration with the Oregon Health Authority, and we are continuing to make sure that the language is aligned with what is going on in their agency, and to make sure that we are really clear about what that model means in practice across both agencies, which has been actually easier than you would think, but it's definitely food for thought. One of the things that we have realized, and I believe that, COVID has really shined a bright light on things across the state that we needed to attend to, whether it be inequities in access to, to technology, to broadband, to cellular service, to mental health service, to all of the things that we and our students need to thrive. That was really, really clear. It also drew attention to the fact that from a systems level, we need to do a better job of really understanding what the landscape of mental health in particular looks like across the state. Because as a good friend of mine says, when you've seen one school, you've seen one school. When you've seen one district, you've seen one district. And so in every single district and every single building, as you all know, there's a tremendous amount of variability. And so as the second goal in this proposal is to first enumerate who's there and what's happening, and then spend a tremendous amount of time really engaging with you and with our communities to understand what the landscape looks like, and begin to understand and unpack where are the strengths, what are we doing well, what is working well, why is it working well, where are the challenges, where are the gaps, what do we need to address in the immediate, what do we need to address in the midterm, and what do we need to address in the long term. As you can imagine, one of the things that we really need to attend to is workforce development and diversity in our workforce, because we, in the mental health area in particular, do not have sufficient workforce to meet the need. And I'm anticipating in response to COVID, there will be an increased need to really address probably tier 1 and tier 2 issues in a more comprehensive way. And we will probably be needing to continue to strengthen crisis supports as well. And there is now a very intensive push to expand telehealth and telemental health. So these are just some of the things that we're grappling with. And once we entertain and we finish that analysis, of course, the next course of action is developing a legislative blueprint. How can we make the state better? What do we need to do? What does that look like? Who needs to be at the table? What funding do we need to support the work? And then, of course, how do we evaluate the impact of our efforts? Do we want to continue to use the metrics that we've historically used? Or is it time for us to be really creative in thinking about what matters? Do we want to look at grades and attendance and referrals as the data points that really inform us as to whether or not we're creating students that are thriving? We're not creating them. Whether we're creating the conditions for them to thrive, or are there other ways of assessing that? And that's a big priority for us. And lastly, ODE and ODE's leadership really is committed to spending a lot of time unpacking this and having really deep conversations about what it means to change the system and what that would look like. And I don't want to make that sound like that is exclusively an ODE enterprise. Part of my work and part of our goal is to engage communities, professional organizations, you, COSA, educators, educator associations, the governor's office, everyone, families, student voice, everyone who plays an important role in education to come to the table so that we can better understand how to serve you well. And that's a big piece of it. So having said that, I want to spend some time getting into small groups and really having a work session around this. You can listen to me talk all day. Maybe you can't, I don't know. But the next piece of this is to roll up our sleeves and think about what does this look like in practice? And we need you. We need you, we need your leadership. We will be engaging, as I said, with associations, student voice, a lot of different people to really understand what are we doing, what are the strengths, what are the challenges, and what do we need to do differently? And more importantly, what does that look like in practice? How can we really affect change? And what is necessary to make that change happen? So we are going to invite you to join a small group of partners and ask these 4 questions. And please do click, there is I'm assuming, Carol, would you mind throwing that link just into the chat, just in case people aren't able to get to it? But we're going to invite you to have this conversation, then each one of you to click on this and really jot down very brief responses in the survey so that we can, I think we're gonna have the www in front of that to make sure the link is live, I believe, yeah. And yeah, so we can collect some information from you and begin to use that information to frame our work. Does that sound fine? So we'll be breaking out for 20 minutes. We'll come back at 11:45, and then I would love, especially because we're a small group, I would love to have a conversation with you and get your thoughts. Alrighty? So anytime you're ready to magically send people to breakout land, thank you. Everybody with us, you can do a show of thumbs or real thumbs on screen. Want to make sure everybody's back and can hear. Yeah, we got some thumbs, yay.
Just here, we can hear you.
Great, okay, thank you. Yep, yep. Zoom is like a box of chocolates, as you know. So, well, I hope that you had a meaningful conversation in your breakout. My apologies, it looks like the link didn't work, so maybe we'll see if we can get that to you. If not, we'll just find another way, but we'll continue to take copious notes. So thank you all so much for participating in the breakout. And I wanted to leave it open now for us to have a conversation. Oh, I just saw something. Thank you. Is that link working for folks? I hope so.
Yeah, the original link was missing a K.
Ah, all right. Well, thank you so much. And so the reason why I threw a survey in here is because, as I mentioned at the beginning, really this process is to begin to get your feedback and your input so that we can shape this together. And I can't think of a better way to shape this than by having a conversation. So I'm going to pop the questions back up. And I, again, apologize for the technology and you're not being able to see them when you were having your conversation. But I'd like to leave it open. We've got about 12 minutes and I'd love to hear more from each of you about, and we don't have to do these in order, but advice you have, challenges you're facing, how can we at ODE be of service to you in thinking about how to put these principles and this model into practice. So would love to get your feedback.
Well, I don't mind starting out, but one of the things that, as far as what can ODE do to facilitate with the Oregon Health Authority about the focus of having increased mental health in schools. Right now, we have it's more co-located, and they're working obviously with referred students, the mental health practitioners, through the Oregon Health Plan, and that's a challenge that we're facing and we want to move to is to mental health for all, and getting the mental health specialist with the building team with full time, and going through the interconnected systems framework methodology to getting that done. And I think that ODE help facilitating something like that statewide. I know there's some school districts that are operating with the ISF model. I know Central School District is for sure, and they're getting that up and off the ground, and they're having we have a good relationship with our mental health agency within our county, and we're just trying to look at the funding piece, and how can ODE facilitate that. We had a good plan when the SIA dollars were there, and now that's up in the air right now. So just about more of that integration of not having co-located systems.
Great feedback. Thank you. Absolutely. This is a huge part of the conversation we're having right now with OHA is first of all, understanding what's there and exactly what you said, Dan, figuring out how to create systems that work for everyone, and co-location I think is a really important question for sure. Other thoughts? Don't be shy. There are no good or bad suggestions. We really do want to hear what you need, but also if you have thoughts for others about what's going well. In the breakout session that we had in our little group, we had some really great examples. I'm not going to call you out, folks, but we had some really great examples of things that people are doing well, and also some identified needs. And I think some of the things that came up were just around, specifically around digital learning and how do we do this work authentically when we're trying to communicate on screens. And this is a great example of we're having a conversation and we can't see each other. So yeah, how do we do that? Other thoughts?
Hi, this is Jenny. In our group, we were talking about what has gone well, and we recognize that there's been some fantastic training, different conferences that staff have been able to attend and then bring that information back to, the school building at large. And so that's something that's gone really well. The challenge that we're facing, and I'm from a fully online school, is how to really weave that into the fabric of the entire school, like day in and day out. So I had some great folks in my room that had some good ideas as far as like not just incorporating with curriculum, but really building those skills in staff and how they're able to use them personally. So then they can better model and whatnot for students, and then continue to spread that. But advice from others, I would love to hear how they've really been able to take that from professional development that's strong to carrying throughout the year.
Thank you. Excellent question. I would love to hear that too. I would love to learn from you all how that is looking in practice in your buildings and in your districts. And if you don't know, what do you think it would look like? What would you like it to look like? Because most of us don't have the answer. I want to honor the silence, but also the opportunity to contribute to a conversation so that we can better understand how to serve you well.
This is Leanne Gallion from Banks School District. I think it's just going to be important for us as school leaders, as educators, to be in contact with each other and to just keep processing this as it goes along, because I think the rate of change that we've had to experience so quickly has been challenging, and we're all going to be figuring things out on our own, in our own ways, what applies to our own district, but continuing to be able to connect and learn from each other is going to be really important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do any of you have any thoughts or any examples of what you're doing in your building in your district to help build community, and particularly among your colleagues, how to maintain that connectivity between you? I know that's been a huge issue that we've been hearing about.
So it's funny, I'm a teacher here. I'm gonna turn my video on. So I'm a teacher, and this moment that's happening where people are like quiet and you're not, like, nobody's responding. Like, I felt this all the time in my meetings with kids last year, right? We would all get on and they wouldn't have their faces on, they wouldn't have their voices on. And it's like, I feel this anxiety, particularly as a teacher at an administrators conference, about saying things, but I feel that way on any Zoom meeting, right? I turn my face off and I don't speak out when a question's asked. And yet I have these expectations that my kids do that. And I wonder if there's like some sort of just like comfort with communication and putting ourselves out there that clearly we need as educators, right? In this moment, we're seeing it amongst ourselves, and that we can foster in our kids, because without faces on the screens, when without voices, it's really hard to even get there. So I'm just kind of noticing that as a reality of our moment right now, but definitely something that we struggled with in the school year. And one of the best things that we did as a district, and I really appreciated my administrator for this, was creating meetings with all staff. And we're a small school, we're a small rural school, so we were able to do that. But that FaceTime, normalizing just seeing each other and talking to each other was really important.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that that's something, I can only speak from my personal experience, but yeah, having meetings and facilitating conversations and engagement when you're staring at a bunch of people's names and thinking about it in the context of teaching. I mean, you can't say to people, turn your cameras on, we need, but we all need this, right? We need exactly what you're saying. We need the FaceTime, we need the feedback, we need the social connection. And yet in some ways this format is starving us of that. And when you are a teacher, when you're trying to lead a conversation, and I mean, like the worst thing ever to be staring at a bunch of boxes, right? It's like, is anyone there? Did they all go to the bathroom? You just don't know. And like, how do we build community in this context? Because I'm a believer that everything needs to be invitational. But on the other hand, like, what are we missing as a culture and a community when we're structuring things this way? And are there lost opportunities for connection? Because I hate being on screen. Full disclosure, hate it. but what are the, you know, what are the consequences of not doing that? And you know, at what point, yeah, like how, I don't know how to negotiate this. I would love some feedback. And I'm sure that, you know, if you're doing a lot of direct teaching, this is what you do every day. This is what I do every day. And yeah, so I want to shut up. Thoughts? Thank you, Hannah. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Well, I mean, I would say that I think that it has a lot to do with, I'll turn my video on too. Yeah, maybe I will. I don't know. It's not working. Anyway, I think it has to do with the ability to be vulnerable and this idea that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to look stupid, or maybe sometimes not have all the answers, or kind of fumble our way through this. And I think that kids need to feel like they can do that as well. And maybe that can help, you know, kids to feel a little bit more comfortable about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it kind of goes back to SEL and what are we modeling? I mean, I think we need to be modeling humor and modeling making mistakes and modeling being okay with the fact that the survey didn't work. And, you know, I mean, this is like constant. We're literally like constantly making mistakes. And that's okay, right? I think we have to hold each other with grace. And that's the only way we're going to get through this bizarro online environment. Yeah. Other thoughts from folks? We've got a minute. Thank you, Joe. It was nice to see your face. And Hannah.
I think going along with that conversation about being vulnerable on the computer, I also have to remember, especially level, it's like full circle. It includes, you know, everybody, not just the students and not just the staff, but family members as well. And I'm wondering if my
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you all. I want to be sensitive of the time and make sure that you have a nice, long, luxurious lunch break, if that's possible. So much gratitude to you. It's lovely to meet you. And actually, I'm really gonna, I know that this, oh no, I think I just lost the whole deal here. I'm gonna put my name in the chat real quick. And if you have ideas, whoopsie. Rushing is not good either. If you want to reach out to me at all, feel free. I'd love to hear from you, any of your thoughts or suggestions. So thank you, take good care, and bye-bye for now.